I am Imani Washington. I am 67 years old. 3 months after I buried my husband, my only daughter looked me in the eye and said, "You work, or you're out on the street." She thought I was old, grieving, and weak. She thought she had stolen my life's work, the company my husband and I built from nothing. In desperation, I took a job as a live-in caregiver for a paralyzed billionaire. But on the very first night, I heard a voice in the dark, a voice that wasn't supposed to exist. And I knew I wasn't the only one with a secret. They thought they had me trapped. They had no idea I was about to use their own greed to burn their entire world to the ground. The greedy ones always come crawling back. Now back to the story. The line at the grocery store was long, but I didn't mind. I was thinking about the gumbo. I was standing in the checkout lane at the Piggly Wiggly, my cart filled with okra, andouille, sausage, and shrimp. Everything I needed for Marcus's favorite meal. My husband Marcus had been gone for 3 months. 3 long months where the house felt too quiet and the nights lasted forever. Making his gumbo, it felt like keeping a part of him with me. I finally reached the cashier, a young girl with bright pink hair. She smiled at me. "That's going to be $62.50. "Wonderful," I said, pulling out my debit card, the card Marcus and I had used for everything. I put it in the machine. Beep. The little screen flashed red. Declined. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. "Oh, that's strange," I mumbled. "Try it again, dear." She did. Beep. Declined. The man behind me sighed loudly. The cashier looked at me with pity. "Ma'am, it's not going through. Do you have another way to pay?" I fumbled in my purse, my hands shaking. I knew there was thousands in that account. I managed to pull out $70 in cash, my emergency money, and paid for the groceries. I left the store without the receipt, the shame burning in my throat. I got into Marcus's old Lincoln, the leather seats still smelling faintly of his cigar smoke. I immediately called the bank. "First Community," a voice answered. "This is Imani Washington. I need to speak to David Henderson." David had been our banker and our friend for 30 years. "Imani," his voice came on the line, heavy with a sadness I didn't understand. I was wondering when you'd call." "David, what's wrong with my card?" "It was just declined at the market. I know for a fact there's money in that account." There was a long pause on the other end. I heard him sigh. "Imani, I don't know how to tell you this." "Tell me what?" My voice was sharp. "I was the chief financial officer of the Washington Community Homes for 40 years. I built that company with Marcus. I knew my accounts." "Imani, the joint account you shared with Marcus, it was closed. Yesterday." The world stopped. "Closed, I didn't close it. Your daughter did," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "Keisha Vance. She was the co-signer on the account. She transferred every cent into a new trust fund. A trust fund that only has her name on it." The phone felt slick in my hand. I remembered years ago adding Keisha to the account. Just in case. Just in case something happened to me and Marcus, she could pay the bills. An emergency measure. How much, David? All of it, Imani. The personal savings, the business operating account, everything. I ended the call. I sat there in the car, the bag of groceries sitting on the passenger seat. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an emergency. My daughter had waited until her father was in the ground, and then she had robbed me. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to Keisha's. I gripped the steering wheel of that old Lincoln, my knuckles white. The cold, quiet rage built in my chest. She wasn't just going to get away with this. I arrived at the sprawling white brick mansion Keisha and her husband rented in the suburbs. The kind of house that costs $10,000 a month just to keep the lights on. I used the key they'd given me and walked right in. The house was cold despite the expensive furniture. Keisha, my 42-year-old daughter, was in the living room posing for a selfie with a brand new Hermes bag. Her husband Chad, her white husband, who called himself a consultant but hadn't held a real job in a decade, was pacing in front of a giant flat-screen TV, yelling into his phone about a stock deal that had gone bad. Neither of them even looked up when I walked in. Keisha. She finally lowered her phone, annoyed by the interruption. Oh, hi, Mum. What are you doing here? Where is my money? Keisha rolled her eyes. That perfect, practiced, dismissive roll. Mum, don't be dramatic. I'm protecting the family assets. You're grieving. You're not in a sound state of mind to be managing finances right now. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not sound of mind. I was the chief financial officer of Washington Community Homes for 40 years. I built that company with your father. I am more sound of mind than you will ever be. You stole from me. Keisha actually laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. Please, Mother, Dad built that company. You just sat in the office and counted the beans. You don't even know the kind of trouble the company is in. We're handling it. That's when Chad, my son-in-law, hung up his call and walked over. He put his hand on my shoulder in that condescending way of his. Imani, he said, like he was explaining something to a child. Keisha is right. We've been reviewing the financials. The debts are significant. It's a mess. To restructure to save anything, we're going to have to sell your house. I looked at him, then at my daughter, the two of them standing there in their $1,000 shoes, telling me they were selling my home. Sell my house. My voice was shaking. The house Marcus built for me. Where will I live? Keisha sighed, bored, and went back to admiring her new purse in the reflection of the TV screen. She looked at her fingernails, not at me. We're not a charity, Mother. Dad's gone. The free ride is over. You can't just sit there and not contribute. If you want to stay in this guest room, you have to pull your weight. She finally looked up, her eyes as cold and hard as marbles. So you have a choice. Either you find a job, or you're out on the street. I stood there frozen. My own daughter. My only child. I had no money. I had no access to my accounts. My credit cards were frozen. And now I had no home. I was 67 years old, a widow, and I had just been evicted by my own daughter. I had no choice. I stayed in the guest room. It was humiliating. I wasn't family. I was unpaid help. Mother, can you get the door? Mother, the dishwasher is full. Mother, Chad needs his suit ironed for a meeting. I did it all. I smiled. I nodded. And I listened. One night I was bringing Chad a glass of water he'd yelled for. I stopped outside his office door. He was on the phone, his voice low and urgent. The buyer in Dubai is ready, he was saying. We just need to liquidate the rest of her assets. The stocks, the art, even her jewelry. Sell it fast. Once it's all converted, we're gone. Keisha's mother won't know what hit her. My blood ran cold. They weren't restructuring the company. They were liquidating me. They were planning to drain everything and run. I went back to my small room, my heart hammering. I wasn't just grieving. I was trapped. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and pulled out my old, cracked smartphone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. Jobs for seniors. Bookkeeping from home. Nothing. Then I saw it. An ad in the classifieds, hidden between listings for housekeeping and landscaping. Confidential companion and caregiver needed for HNW individual. HNW. High net worth. Must be discreet. Strict NDA required. High pay. Live in. I stared at the words. Live in. It was a way out. It was the only way out. I took a deep breath, my pride stinging. 40 years as a CFO, and now I was applying to be a caregiver. But they had left me nothing. I pressed apply. The plane ticket was one way. Keisha and Chad had paid for it, eager to get me out of their house. A new start for you, mother, Keisha had said, her smile brittle. The taxi from the airport drove for nearly an hour, leaving the bright lights of Miami behind and heading toward the coast to a place called Jupiter Island. The driver eventually stopped at a set of gates that were at least 20 feet high. Solid black steel, no design, just pure intimidation. A camera, small and black, swiveled to look at us. Name, a voice crackled from an intercom. Imani Washington, I have an interview. There was a long pause, then a heavy buzz, and the gates slowly rolled open. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. You sure about this? Lady place looks like a fortress. Just drop me at the front door, I said. He was right. The driveway wound through a jungle of manicured trees, but the house itself wasn't a home. It was a statement. All glass and white stone, perched on the edge of the ocean, like it was daring the water to touch it. Cameras were everywhere. Small, discreet domes under the eaves on the corners of the walls, even hidden in the landscaping. This wasn't a house. It was a prison. A woman in a severe black pantsuit opened the door before I could even knock. She was in her 50s, African-American like me, but where I felt worn down by life, she looked like she was carved from obsidian. Her hair was pulled into a tight, perfect bun, and her eyes missed nothing. Mrs. Washington, I am Ms. Diana, the head of house. Follow me. Her voice was as starched as her white shirt. She didn't ask about my trip. She didn't offer water. She led me through a foyer so large it echoed into a vast, cold office. She sat behind a massive desk and gestured for me to sit opposite her. She picked up my application, a single piece of paper, and looked at it as if it were something distasteful. Your file is ridiculous, she said. Her voice was flat. I am aware. I replied, my hands folded in my lap. You are 67 years old. You were the chief financial officer of a multi-million-dollar real estate firm for 40 years. You have no medical experience. You have no caregiving experience. And you are applying for a job that requires you to be on call 24/7. Why are you here? I met her gaze. I had nothing left to lose, so I gave her the one thing I had left, the truth. My daughter and son-in-law have stolen my assets. They have seized control of my company, sold my home, and frozen my accounts. I need a job, Ms. Diana, and I need a place to live. I am not a nurse, that is true. But I managed a company with 50 employees. I know how to run a household. I know how to be discreet. And I know when to be quiet. Miss Diana stared at me. She didn't blink. The silence in the room stretched, broken only by the sound of the ocean crashing outside the giant windows. I thought she was going to call security to have me thrown out. Instead, she slid a thick stack of papers across the desk. This is a non-disclosure agreement. It is 20 pages long. It is ironclad. If you so much as tell a grocery clerk what you see in this house, our lawyers will ensure you spend the rest of your life in court. She stood up and walked to the window. Our employer, Mr. Thorne, was in an accident 5 years ago. He is paralyzed from the neck down. He cannot speak. He communicates only through a specialized computer. He requires a companion. Someone to read to him, to discuss the market reports, to be a human presence. He does not need a nurse. He has those. He needs a mind. She turned back to me. You will live here. You will not be permitted to leave the grounds without my express permission. You will have no visitors. Your phone will be monitored. In exchange, you will be paid a salary that is substantial, and you will have a roof over your head. She pushed a pen toward me. Sign it, and the job is yours. Break it, and you will regret it. I looked at the signature line. I thought of Keisha's cold eyes. You work, or you're out on the street. I picked up the pen and signed my name. I had no other choice. Mr. Thorne is inside, she said, her voice low. He will give you your instructions. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ask personal questions. Do not deviate from the tasks he gives you. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, I said. She opened one of the heavy doors and gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside. The room was enormous, at least 50 feet long, and almost completely dark. The only light came from a wall of glass at the far end, which looked out over the churning Atlantic Ocean. The sun was setting, casting long, weak shadows across the room. And in the center of that light, silhouetted against the grey sky, sat a man. He was in the most advanced wheelchair I had ever seen. It looked less like a chair, and more like a high-tech throne, all black metal and glowing blue indicator lights. His back was to me. He was staring out at the ocean. He didn't move. He didn't turn around. I stood there in the silence, feeling small and out of place. The air was cold. I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. Just as I was about to clear my throat, a voice spoke. It didn't come from the man. It came from speakers somewhere in the ceiling. It was a synthesized voice, perfectly flat, without any human emotion at all. Welcome, Mrs. Washington. I flinched. The sound was unnerving. Good evening, Mr. Thorne, I said to his back. You will begin immediately, the computer voice continued. On the desk to your left, you will find the third quarter financial report for Tesla. You will read it aloud, all of it, including the footnotes. I looked at the desk. A thick bound document sat under a single spotlight. This was it, my new job, reading financial reports to the back of a rich man's head. Of course, sir, I said. I sat down, opened the report, and began to read. For 2 hours, I read about market projections and revenue streams, my voice filling the vast, dark room. He never turned around. He never made a sound. He just sat there, a black silhouette against the dying light, a ghost in his own home. My new life settled into a strange, suffocating routine. I woke at 6, dressed in the simple black uniform Ms. Diana had provided, and reported to the kitchen. I would prepare Mr. Thorne's breakfast, always the same oatmeal with berries, and place it on a tray. Ms. Diana would then take the tray to his room. I was not permitted to enter. My days were spent in that cavernous, dark office. My first task was always reading the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, Forbes. I read them cover to cover. Then came the corporate reports, stacks of them. He would have me read for hours, my throat growing dry. Continue, the computer voice would say, just as I paused for a sip of water. He was brilliant. There was no denying that. Sometimes he would have me stop. Reread that last paragraph on asset allocation, Mrs. Washington. I would read it. Their debt-to-income ratio is unsustainable, the computer voice would state. They are hiding liabilities in their offshore holdings. Find it. And I would. I would use the computer provided for me and my 40 years of financial experience to dig through their numbers. And I would find exactly what he predicted. He wasn't just listening, he was hunting. In the afternoons, the work shifted. "Read me James Baldwin," the voice would command, and I would read "Go Tell It on the Mountain" for an hour. The next day, it would be Toni Morrison, Beloved. He had impeccable taste, he was sharp-focused and utterly devoid of warmth. He was less a person and more of a presence, a cold intelligence that filled the house. I cooked simple meals, I read complex books, I analyzed market data. And I never saw his face, I never heard his real voice. Everything went through Ms. Diana. She was the gatekeeper, the warden. She watched me constantly. I felt her eyes on me when I was in the kitchen, when I was reading in the office, even when I was walking in the small, walled garden I was permitted to use for 30 minutes a day. This wasn't a job. It was a sentence. I was living in a gilded cage. The house was a fortress. But I began to realize the security wasn't just to keep people out, it was to keep him in. I started to notice the small things, the things that didn't add up. The first time was at 9 p.m. It was the end of my shift. Mr. Thorne had dismissed me with his usual, "That will be all, Mrs. Washington." I was walking down the hall when Ms. Diana came out of his office. She pulled the heavy doors shut, and then I heard it. Click, the sound of a deadbolt. I stopped. She was locking him in. Not from the inside like a normal person would lock their office. She was locking it from the outside. I frowned but said nothing. I continued to my room. The next night I watched. I pretended to be walking to the kitchen. At 9:02, Ms. Diana emerged. She pulled the doors shut. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a key, and locked the deadbolt from the outside. My blood ran cold. Why would you lock a paralyzed man in his room? What if there was a fire? What if he had an emergency? The security was excessive. There were guards who patrolled the perimeter with dogs. I understood that. He was a billionaire. But this felt different. This felt like imprisonment. I started to pay more attention. I noticed that Ms. Diana was the only one with access to his medication. She kept it in a locked box in her own office. She was the only one who administered it. I realized I had not seen another soul in this house besides Ms. Diana. The silent guards at the gate, and the back of Mr. Thorne's head. No doctors, no therapists, no visitors. My daughter had put me in the street, and I had escaped into a prison. I was trapped here just as surely as he was. And the person holding the key to both our cages was Ms. Diana. It was my first night. I was in the small, sterile room Ms. Diana had assigned me. It was comfortable enough, I supposed, with a view of the dark garden. But the silence was deafening. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Keisha's voice, out on the street. I sat up in bed looking at the clock. 2:17 a.m. And that's when I heard it. Crash! It was a heavy sound from the West Wing, from Mr. Thorne's office. It wasn't the sound of someone falling. It was the sound of something being thrown, like a heavy glass object hitting a wall and shattering. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought about Ms. Diana's rules. Do not deviate. Do not ask questions. Your shift ends at 9. But I'd spent 40 years running a company. When you hear something break in the middle of the night, you don't just roll over and go back to sleep. I got out of bed, pulling my thin robe around me. I slipped my feet into my shoes. I eased my bedroom door open. The marble hallway was pitch black, colder than the rest of the house. I crept forward, my bare feet making no sound on the stone. The house was silent again. Had I imagined it? No. I knew what I heard. As I got closer to his office, I slowed down. I could feel the adrenaline cold and sharp. I remembered Miss Diana locking that door from the outside. Whoever was in there was locked in with him. I reached the massive wooden doors. I pressed my ear against the cold wood. Silence. And then a voice. It was a man's voice, low, angry, and real. It wasn't the computer. "You can't hide in here forever, X," the voice snarled. "The board isn't going to wait. They're getting suspicious." I pressed my ear harder, my breath catching in my throat. There was a muffled sound like a grunt, but not a word. "Damn it," the real voice said again. "Just sign the papers, sign over the proxy, and this all goes away. I'm trying to help you, you stubborn fool." My mind was spinning. Who was in there? How did he get in? Was Ms. Diana part of this? Was my new employer being threatened? I heard another sound, a low mechanical whirring. The wheelchair. "Don't," the real voice said, suddenly softer. "Don't try to type. I know what you're going to say. Just nod. Nod if you'll sign." A long, terrible silence followed. "Fine," the voice spat. "Have it your way. I'll be back tomorrow. And tomorrow I'm bringing Mark Jenkins with me. See how you feel then." Mark Jenkins. I knew that name. A ruthless venture capitalist, a corporate raider. I heard footsteps approaching the door from the inside. I stumbled back, hiding in the shadow of an alcove just as the deadbolt turned. But how Ms. Diana had the key? Before I could process it, my fear and my 40 years of taking charge took over. I stepped out of the shadows. "Mr. Thorne," I called out, my voice too loud in the hallway. "Are you all right? I heard a crash." The footsteps inside stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. It was absolute. I stood there, my heart feeling like it was going to burst out of my chest. I had broken every rule. I waited. 30 seconds, a minute. Then I heard the sound I dreaded. The click of the deadbolt from the inside. The heavy door opened just a crack. I saw him. Xavier Thorne, sitting in his high-tech chair, his back to me, just like always. The room behind him was pitch black. I couldn't see if anyone else was there. I couldn't see any broken glass. He didn't move. Then the computer voice filled the hall, colder and angrier than I had ever heard it. "You have violated the rules, Mrs. Washington. You are not to be in this wing after 9 p.m. "But I heard," I stammered. "I heard voices. I heard a crash." "You heard the television?" the computer voice stated. "I was watching a movie. The sound was too loud. It will not happen again." It wasn't a movie. I knew it wasn't. The anger in that voice was real. The threats were real. "Go back to your room, now." I stared at the back of his head, at the silhouette of the man in the chair. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," I whispered. I turned and walked back down the long, dark, cold hallway. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. That wasn't the television. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was not the only prisoner in this house. The night I heard that voice in the dark, everything changed. I went back to my duties the next day. But I was no longer just a caregiver. I was a witness. I was a prisoner, yes. But I was a prisoner who knew the warden was hiding something. I knew Miss Diana was watching me. I felt her eyes on me when I wiped down the counters when I walked in the garden. She was waiting for me to slip up to ask the wrong question, so I asked no questions. I said nothing. I became the perfect obedient employee. I arrived at his office at 9 a.m. I read the market summaries. I read the profit and loss statements. I read Toni Morrison. And at 9 p.m., I would leave, hearing Ms. Diana turn that heavy deadbolt key in the lock behind me. But something had shifted in him. He wasn't just making me read anymore. He was testing me. One afternoon, I was reading a quarterly report from a tech firm he was heavily invested in. The numbers were good. The projections were glowing. Too good. Too glowing. They project 30% growth in the next quarter, the synthesized voice said. Your thoughts, Mrs. Washington? I stopped reading. I placed the report face down on my lap. I looked at the back of his head, silhouetted against the grey ocean. They're lying, I said. The room went utterly still. The only sound was the low electronic hum of his chair. I knew I had crossed a line, but I was tired of playing the part of a mindless reader. Explain, the computer voice commanded. I stood up. I walked closer to the desk, feeling the old fire I hadn't felt since Marcus died, since Keisha's betrayal. I am a chief financial officer, Mr. Thorne. Or I was. I've seen books cooked like this 100 times. I picked up the report and tapped the page. Their revenue is up, yes, but their accounts receivable are triple what they were last quarter. They're booking sales that haven't been paid for. They're desperate. I flipped the page. And look here. Their debt-to-asset ratio. They're ignoring the risk. They're leveraging unsecured high-interest loans to fund this growth. This isn't growth, Mr. Thorne. It's a house of cards. It's a time bomb. The room was quiet for a very long time. I thought perhaps I had finally gone too far, that Ms. Diana would appear at the door to escort me to the gate. I had failed the test. Then the synthesized voice spoke again. You analyze, the voice stated, better than my entire board of directors. It wasn't a compliment. It was a fact. And it was a promotion. After that day, the work changed. He stopped asking me to read novels. He started sending me spreadsheets, raw data, internal memos. He was using my mind, my 40 years of experience. And I was using his work to keep my own mind sharp. We were two prisoners in a cage operating on an unspoken truce. He knew I knew something, and he respected me for not speaking of it. It happened 3 weeks after I'd called out the bad report. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just finished cleaning my small kitchen, getting ready to read a book before bed. Suddenly, a piercing, high-pitched alarm shattered the silence of the house. It wasn't a fire alarm. It was different. A high, thin, electronic wail. A medical alert. My heart leapt into my throat. Xavier. I didn't think about the rules. I didn't think about Ms. Diana or the locked doors. I just ran. I flew down the cold marble hallway, my feet slipping. I ran toward his office, expecting to find the heavy doors locked, expecting to have to beat on them, screaming for Ms. Diana. But when I reached them, I saw the first thing that was wrong. The door was open, just a crack. Ms. Diana never left that door unlocked, ever. I shoved the heavy door open. Mr. Thorne. The room was dark, as always, lit only by the blue glow of his multiple computer monitors. But the room was not empty. He wasn't in his chair. I saw the chair first overturned near the desk, its blue lights blinking uselessly. And then I saw him. He was on the floor. He had fallen somehow and was lying on his side on the thick Persian rug. His face was beet red, and he was gasping, straining his neck, corded with effort. He wasn't reaching for the medical alert button on his wrist. He was crawling. He was dragging his useless legs, pulling his body across the floor with a strength I didn't know he possessed. His target was his computer, the laptop that controlled his voice, his environment, his life. It had fallen to the floor in front of the desk, just out of his reach. "Mr. Thorne!" I screamed again, rushing toward him. He was panting, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. He looked up at me, and for the very first time I saw his face. I saw his eyes. They weren't cold. They weren't distant. They were terrified. They were full of pain and sheer animalistic panic. I dropped to my knees beside him. "I'll call Ms. Diana. I'll call 911. I reached for the alert button on the wall. "No." The voice ripped out of his chest. It was a real voice, a deep, powerful, desperate roar, the same voice I had heard in the dark. Xavier Thorne was still on the floor, propped up on one elbow. He was breathing hard sweat covering his face. But his eyes were alive. They were sharp, intelligent, and blazing with an intensity I had never seen. "You..."
No.
I whispered my mind, unable to connect the man on the floor with the silent silhouette in the chair. "You can talk." He let out a harsh breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, Mrs. Washington." He panted, his voice rough from disuse. "I can talk." He pushed himself back, his arms straining until he was leaning against the leg of his heavy desk. He gestured angrily at his legs. "This," he said, slapping his thigh. "This is real. The accident, it crushed my L4 and L5 vertebrae. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I haven't taken a step in 5 years." He looked up at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical blow. But my mind, my voice, they are fine. I just stared, my mind racing. The computer, the silence, the locked door. "But why pretend?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "the man who put me in this chair is still trying to finish the job." He looked away toward the dark ocean outside. 5 years ago, I wasn't just in an accident. I was put in an accident. My business partner, Mark Jenkins, he arranged it. A cut brake line on a mountain road. He wanted me dead. He wanted the company. Our company. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold room. "When I survived," Xavier continued, "he changed tactics. He couldn't get the company if I was alive, but maybe he could if I was declared incompetent. He started a rumor campaign that the accident had done more than take my legs, that I had severe brain damage, that I was a vegetable, that I couldn't speak, couldn't reason." He pointed to the fallen laptop, the source of his synthesized voice. "So I decided to use his own lie against him. I embraced it. I became the mute, mindless invalid everyone wanted me to be. I use that machine, to hide. I pretend to be weaker than I am while I gather the proof I need to destroy him." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Only Ms. Diana knew the truth. She's the only one I could trust. Until now." The silence in the room was heavy, filled with his pain and his rage. I finally found my voice. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why tell me?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something. A connection. "Because, Mrs. Washington, before I hired you, I had you investigated. Thoroughly." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I know all about Keisha and Chad. I know they stole your company. I know they sold your home. I know they left you with nothing. I know they look at you, and they see an old, grieving, useless woman." He leaned forward, his eyes burning into mine. "We are the same Imani, you and I. We are the people our families and our partners threw away. They think we are weak. They think we are old and disabled. They think we are finished. He smiled a cold, hard, brilliant smile. It's time to prove them wrong. I was no longer a caregiver. I was an ally. The next morning, Ms. Diana brought me a new laptop. It was military-grade matte, black and heavy. "This is a closed system, Jane," she explained, her voice all business. "It does not connect to the outside internet. It connects only to Mr. Thorne's private server. What you see on this screen does not exist anywhere else in the world." My real work began. Xavier was relentless. He had me in his office from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. But now he didn't use the computer voice. He spoke to me directly, his real voice, low and commanding. "Mark thinks he's a ghost," Xavier said on the first day, his eyes fixed on a wall of monitors. "He moves money through layers of shell companies. He thinks no one can follow the trail. He's wrong. You and I, Imani, we speak the same language, the language of numbers. I need you to find his mistakes." For the first time in months, since before Marcus died, I felt alive. This wasn't just bookkeeping. This was a hunt. I sat at a desk opposite his, and I tore into the data he provided. Decades of transactions, offshore accounts, acquisition reports. And I found them. "He's sloppy here," I murmured, pointing to a line item on my screen. "He's using a holding company in the Caymans to pay for consulting fees to another company in Delaware." "What's wrong with that?" Xavier asked. "The Delaware company," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "It was founded on the same day as the Cayman account. And the consulting fees are all identical, down to the cent paid on the first of every month. It's not a fee, Mr. Thorne. It's a payment. He's not hiring a consultant. He's paying someone." "Keep digging," he said, his voice pleased. For 2 weeks, that's all we did. We worked in tandem. Ms. Diana would bring us trays of food. We'd eat at our desks. We traced millions of dollars. I uncovered a network of 4 shell companies, all registered in states with lax reporting laws, all seemingly disconnected. But I found the thread. The same legal firm in Wilmington, Delaware, had filed the paperwork for all 4. "He's laundering the money," I said, leaning back in my chair, the thrill of the chase making my heart beat faster. "He's stealing from the company with one hand and then paying himself back through these 4 companies disguised as vendor payments. He's stealing millions." "I know," Xavier said. "But where is it going?" "Find the final destination." I worked late into the night. Ms. Diana had long since gone to bed. Xavier was asleep in his chair, a light snore escaping him. I stared at the screen at the 4 company names: Apex Global, Trident Logistics, Horizon Futures, and the 4th one, the newest one. My eyes blurred. I rubbed them and looked again. Vance Consulting LLC. I stopped breathing. The room was silent save for the hum of the servers and Xavier's soft breathing. Vance. Vance. It couldn't be. It was a common name. It had to be a coincidence. My hands were shaking. I clicked on the file. Date of incorporation: 3 months ago, the exact same week Marcus died. Registered agent: Chad Vance. Address: the same address as the mansion Keisha and Chad were renting. My vision tunneled. The air left my lungs. It wasn't a coincidence. My son-in-law, the man who had sat there while my daughter told me to get a job or get out, the man who was selling my house, was a shell company for Mark Jenkins. Imani. Xavier was awake. He had heard the change in my breathing. I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the screen. He maneuvered his chair over his brow, furrowed. He looked at the screen, then at my face. my face, which I'm sure was pale as a ghost. "What is it?" he asked, his real voice soft. "Vance," I whispered. "Chad Vance. That is my son-in-law." Xavier stared at the screen. He said nothing for a full minute. The implications hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "Mrs. Diana," he said, speaking into a small microphone on his chair. She was in the room in less than 30 seconds, as if she had been waiting just outside the door. She looked at me, then at Xavier. "What is it?" "Get me everything you can on Vance Consulting. Now," Xavier commanded. "And," he added, his voice turning to ice, "get me everything on Mark Jenkins's personal movements for the last 6 months. I want to know who he's been meeting with. I want to know everything." Ms. Diana nodded once and was gone. "Xavier," I said, my voice trembling. "What does this mean?" "It means," he said, wheeling himself back to the window, "that your family's betrayal is not a separate event. It's part of my betrayal." The pieces started to click into place, each one more horrifying than the last. Keisha stealing my money, Chad setting up a shell company. It all happened at the same time. Mrs. Diana returned 2 hours later. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the ocean in shades of grey and pink. She held a tablet. "You were right, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice tight with fury. "It's all connected." She put the tablet in front of me. "Mark Jenkins met with Chad Vance 3 times in the last 2 months, once at a steakhouse in Palm Beach, twice on Jenkins' yacht." She swiped the screen. "Bank records. This is the account for Vance Consulting. 2 weeks ago, it received a wire transfer of $250,000. My money," I whispered. That was the liquid savings Keisha had stolen. "It gets worse," Ms. Diana said. She showed me another file. It was a flight itinerary. "Jenkins has booked a one-way flight to Dubai for Chad and Keisha Vance. It leaves in 3 days. "What?" "It's a classic setup," Xavier said, his voice a low growl. "Jenkins finds 2 greedy, foolish people. He promises them a piece of the pie. He convinces them to liquidate their own family's assets, to get their hands dirty first." "But they were giving him my money," I asked. "Yes," Xavier said. "They give him your stolen cash. He cleans it for them, mixes it with his own stolen money, and wires it to an offshore account in Dubai. He tells them it's their new life, their investment." The full, ugly truth settled on me. "And then," I finished the words, tasting like ash, "he has them take the fall." "Exactly," Xavier said. "He lets them run. Once they're out of the country, he reports them to the authorities for the initial theft, your theft. He plays the part of the concerned associate who just discovered his employee Chad was a con man. He burns them, cuts the tie, and he keeps your money and the millions he's stolen from me. Keisha, my daughter, she wasn't just a thief. She was a fool, a pawn in a much bigger, more dangerous game." "The house," I said, my mind racing. "They're trying to sell my house. That's the last piece. They're trying to liquidate it before they run." "When is the sale?" Xavier asked. "The closing was supposed to be in 2 days." Xavier looked at Ms. Diana. "We're running out of time. We have to stop them, not just for my company, but for Imani's." We knew they would get desperate. When the sale of my house stalled, thanks to a quiet call from Xavier's lawyers to the title company, and my phone was suddenly out of service, I knew they would panic. They couldn't liquidate my assets. They couldn't flee the country. They were trapped. I was in the main kitchen with Ms. Diana polishing silver, my new job. I was polishing a heavy sterling silver spoon when the security feed on Ms. Diana's tablet flashed. A white BMW convertible, Chad's car. It sped up the long driveway and screeched to a halt on the gravel, nearly hitting the antique fountain. "They're here," Ms. Diana said, her voice flat. "I know," I replied, my hands steady. "Let them in, please." I walked to the grand foyer, smoothing the front of my simple black uniform. The apron felt clean and crisp. It felt like armor. I stood by the door, waiting. The doorbell rang, not once, but 5, 6 times, a frantic, angry, impatient stabbing. I took a deep breath. I opened the heavy front door. Keisha stood there, her face twisted in rage. Chad was right behind her, his own face red with frustration. They both froze when they saw me. They stared at my uniform, the simple black dress, the clean white apron. Keisha's mouth fell open. "Mom!" she shrieked. Her voice echoed in the marble foyer. What are you wearing?" She pushed past me, her high heels clicking aggressively on the stone floor. She looked around, disgusted and confused. "What is this place? And what are you doing in that costume? Mother!" Her voice was rising hysterical. "What in God's name are you doing here? Are you a maid? A helper?" She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a kind of horror I hadn't seen before. Not horror for me. Horror for herself. The embarrassment. "You're a servant," she whispered, like the word itself was poison. My God, this is humiliating. I stood there, my back straight. I felt nothing, no shame, no anger, just a cold, clear focus. "I told you, Keisha," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I got a job." "A job?" she yelled. "This isn't a job. This is slavery after everything Dad and I did to protect you. You run off and become a maid." Chad wasn't listening to her. He was staring. His eyes were wide, taking in the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the priceless art on the walls. He looked pale, paler than I'd ever seen him. "Keisha," he said, his voice a strained, low whisper. "Keisha, shut up." "Don't tell me to shut up, Chad. Her mother is polishing silver like—" "Keisha, I know this house." His words cut through her tirade. She stopped. "What do you mean you know this house?" Chad was backing away toward the door, his eyes darting toward the security cameras he was just now noticing. "This isn't just a house," he stammered. This is the Thorne estate. This is Xavier Thorne's house." Keisha looked blank. "Who? Xavier Thorne?" Chad hissed, his voice cracking. "Mark Jenkins's. He's the man, Mark." "That is correct." The synthesized voice boomed from the speakers in the ceiling. We all looked up. Xavier. He was rolling out from the dark hallway, maneuvering his high-tech chair into the center of the foyer. He was in his mute role. He looked small, frail, a blanket over his legs. Chad looked like he was going to be sick. He physically recoiled, as if Xavier was a ghost. Mr. Thorne," Chad stammered frantically, trying to straighten his expensive jacket. "Sir, I didn't mean to intrude. I'm Chad Vance. I work with Mark Jenkins." Keisha was staring completely confused. "Chad, what's going on? Who is this?" "He's my employer," I said quietly. Xavier rolled forward another foot. The quiet whir of the chair was the only sound. Chad flinched. Then the computer voice spoke again, loud and cold in the cavernous room. "I know who you are, Mr. Vance." Chad stopped breathing. You are trespassing on my property. You have 5 seconds to leave before I alert my security team. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Right away, Chad babbled. He grabbed Keisha's arm, yanking her hard, pulling her toward the door. Chad, get off me! What are you doing? Keisha shrieked. We're leaving now, he yelled, panic making his voice high-pitched. He dragged her backward, stumbling out of the open doorway. Keisha, get in the car. Get in the car, now. I watched them scramble into their BMW. Chad fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up. He reversed so fast, the tires screamed, spraying gravel all over the walkway. As the car sped down the long driveway, I could hear Keisha's voice, even from a distance, screaming at him. And I heard Chad's voice, frantic, terrified reply. We are in so much trouble. We are in so much trouble. Your mother is working for him. I stood in the doorway, feeling the cool ocean breeze on my face. I turned back to Xavier. He was still sitting in the center of the foyer, watching me. I smoothed my apron. Phase 1 is complete, Mr. Thorne, I said. He turned his chair toward his office. The synthesized voice came one last time. Good. Begin Phase 2. Xavier wheeled himself over to the large, dark window, his real voice quiet but filling the room. They're rats in a trap, Imani, and you just lit a fire at the entrance. He was right. After Chad and Keisha fled the estate, they were desperate. We knew Mark Jenkins would be putting immense pressure on them. He'd realize his connection to Chad was now known by Xavier. He'd want his money, and he'd want his scapegoats. They have nowhere to run, I said, standing beside him, watching the storm clouds gather over the ocean. They have one place, Xavier countered. Dubai. Their flight is in 3 days. Jenkins will be pushing them to liquidate the last asset, your house, and get on that plane. But your lawyers stalled the sale, I reminded him. For now, he said. But desperate men do desperate things. Chad will try to find a cash buyer, an illegal sale, anything to get liquid. Jenkins will force his hand. We can't just wait for them to make a move. We have to force the move. He turned his chair to face me. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, via Zoom, in 2 days. I'm going to present my findings. Not all of them. Just enough to light a fire under Mark Jenkins. I'll show the board the existence of the shell companies, but not who owns them. I'll let him sweat thinking I'm about to expose him. You're setting a trap for Jenkins, I said, understanding. Yes, Xavier said. And you, Imani, will set the trap for your daughter. I knew exactly what I had to do. While Xavier and Ms. Diana prepared the corporate ambush, I prepared the personal one. I waited a full day. I let them sit in their panic. I let them imagine Xavier's cold computer voice. I let them feel the walls closing in. Then on Wednesday afternoon, I went to my room, took a deep breath, and dialed Keisha's number. I let my hand shake. I let the tears I'd been holding back for 3 months finally come. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp and cold. What do you want, Mother? Did you get fired already? Keisha, I whispered, letting my voice crack and break. Keisha, baby, I'm so scared. There was a silence on the other end. Scared of what? She snapped. I was wrong, I sobbed. You were right. Chad was right. I'm just an old woman. I don't know what I'm doing. That man, Mr. Thorne, he's terrifying. I can't stay here. I need to leave. I need you. I could almost hear her rolling her eyes. So what do you want? You have no money. You signed the NDA. You're trapped. No, I whispered, delivering the bait. That's just it. Marcus, your father, he kept things before he died. He was worried, he said. He left something for us. The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing. What? She asked, her voice losing its edge, replaced by a new sharp interest. He told me if I was ever in real trouble. He kept them in the old house, in the wall safe, behind the painting of the ocean. Kept what mother spit it out. Diamonds. I lied. Bearer bonds. He said they were worth millions. 5 million, he said. For an emergency. Keisha, this is an emergency. I want you to have them. I want to make things right. I want my family back. Just help me. I don't want this rich man. I just want you. The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear her muffled voice talking to Chad. She says there are diamonds in the old house. Millions. I heard Chad's frantic, muffled reply. It's a trap. It has to be. Keisha came back on the line, her voice suddenly sweet, like honey poured over poison. Oh, Mama. Of course. Of course we'll help you. You're right. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. We were just trying to protect you. You stay right there. We'll figure this out. No, I cried, playing my part. Don't come here. That man, he's watching me. I'll sneak out. Meet me at the old house, our house, tomorrow, at 4 p.m. Bring the key. I don't have mine anymore. Tomorrow at 4, she repeated, her voice pure excitement. We'll be there, Mama. We'll fix everything. Don't you worry. I hung up the phone. My hands were no longer shaking. The house was cold. My house. The house Marcus and I had built. It had been emptied. The furniture was gone sold by Keisha and Chad. The rooms echoed. Xavier's security team had been here for hours. A large 60-inch television screen was mounted on the main living room wall, dark and silent. Small pinhole cameras were hidden in the ceiling corners. I stood in the center of the empty room, waiting. At exactly 4 p.m., I heard a car skid to a stop in the driveway. The front door burst open. Keisha and Chad ran in. They didn't look sick. They looked greedy. Where are they? Keisha demanded, her eyes scanning the empty room. Where's the safe behind which wall? Chad was more nervous, his eyes darting to the windows. Keisha, this feels wrong. Let's just go. We still have the flight. Not without $5 million, she snapped. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. Mother, where is it? Stop playing games, we don't have time. I looked at my daughter, at her desperate, ugly face. There are no diamonds, Keisha, I said. My voice was calm and clear. It echoed in the empty room. Keisha's face went from confusion to rage. What? What did you say? You lied to me. I repeated, pulling my arm from her grasp. There are no diamonds. You old... Before she could finish, the large television screen on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't a movie. It was a Zoom call. 12 faces in 12 little boxes. The entire board of directors of Thorn Enterprises. And in the center box, Xavier. He was at his desk in his house. Chad froze. He made a small, strangled sound. He recognized the board members from the company website. Hello, Chad. Hello, Keisha, Xavier said. And his real voice, his deep, clear, powerful voice, boomed through the living room. Chad's face went from pale to a sick, greenish white. He knew. He knew it was over. Keisha just stared, confused. Chad, what is this? Who is that? On the Zoom screen, another man's face. Mark Jenkins suddenly went rigid with pure, unadulterated panic. Xavier smiled a predator's smile. And hello to you too, Mark, he said, his voice echoing. You all seem to be under the impression that Mrs. Imani Washington is incompetent, that she's an old woman who isn't sound of mind. Funny. Xavier leaned into his camera. She's the one who just helped me find your $50 million embezzlement scheme. The room was completely silent. And then we all heard the sound of sirens getting closer and closer. On the television screen, Mark Jenkins's face was a mask of pure terror. He was yelling, "Shut it down! Shut it down now!" Board members were shouting. Chaos. And through the open windows of my own house, the sound of sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. A wail that cut through the afternoon air. Keisha and Chad stood frozen, their faces ashen. What did you do?" Keisha whispered, finally looking at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "I did what you told me to do, Keisha," I said. "I went to work." The front door burst open. "Police! Nobody move hands in the air." 2 officers stormed in, guns drawn. Simultaneously on the television screen, we watched the doors to Mark Jenkins's boardroom fly open. Police officers flooded his room 1,000 miles away. We watched them pull a stunned, sputtering Mark Jenkins from his chair. "Put your hands behind your back, sir." In my living room, the same scene played out. "You two," the officer said, pointing at my daughter and son-in-law. "Turn around. Hands behind your backs." Chad was silent. He looked completely broken, a pale, empty shell. He did as he was told, the fight gone out of him. But Keisha fell apart. "No," she screamed, her voice cracking. "No, you can't. This is a misunderstanding. This is my mother's house." "We were invited." "Ma'am, turn around. Now." The officer was firm, grabbing her arm. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut, cold and final, echoed in the empty room. Click. That was the sound of Keisha's life ending. She stared at the metal on her wrists. She looked at Chad, who wouldn't even look at her. She looked at the police officers. She looked at the blank TV screen where her future had just evaporated. And then she looked at me. "No, no, Mama!" It was a wail, a desperate primal scream. As the officer tried to pull her to her feet, she thrashed, wrenching her arm from his grasp. She stumbled, fell to her knees and crawled. She actually crawled across the bare hardwood floor, dragging the handcuffs, sobbing snot and tears streaming down her face. She collapsed at my feet, grabbing the hem of my simple black uniform. "Mama, please don't let them. Please, you have to tell them." She pressed her face against my legs. Her voice choked and pathetic. "It was Chad. It was all Chad. He made me. He threatened me. I didn't know what I was doing. He said it was just an investment. I didn't know, Mama. I didn't know." She was lying even now. "Please," she begged. Looking up at me, her expensive mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. "I'm your daughter. I'm your daughter. You can't let them do this. Tell them to stop. Tell them you'll fix it. Please, Mama, help me." I stood perfectly still. I looked down at the pathetic, broken creature clinging to my ankles. The woman who had told me to get a job or get out. The woman who had tried to steal my home, my past, and my future. I slowly, deliberately lifted my foot and stepped back, breaking her desperate grip. Her hands clutched at the empty air. I looked down at her, my voice clear and cold, cutting through her sobs. No, you are not my daughter. You are a criminal. I let that hang in the air. And you were right about one thing, Keisha. I do need to work. She stared up at me, confused, hopeful for half a second. I need, I said, to go to work with my lawyers, to make sure that you and your husband pay back every single cent you stole. From me, and from Mr. Thorne. I turned my back on her. I didn't look at Chad. I didn't look at the police. I walked out of the house Marcus and I had built, leaving my daughter screaming and wailing my name on the empty floor. I stepped out into the clean, fresh air, and I did not look back. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom. I wasn't in the defendant's chair. I was in the front row. Keisha and Chad. They lost everything. The court-appointed auditors had uncovered the full scope of their fraud. When faced with the mountain of evidence from my 40 years of financial records and the testimony of a billionaire, they had no choice. They pleaded guilty. They were convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and financial elder abuse. The judge was not kind. He ordered them to pay full restitution, millions of dollars they didn't have and would never have. Chad was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. Keisha, my daughter, stood before the judge, sobbing, begging for mercy. She blamed Chad. She blamed Mark Jenkins. She blamed me for not being supportive. The judge looked at her, his face like stone. He sentenced her to 5 years. As for Mark Jenkins, his empire of lies built on embezzlement and betrayal, it collapsed. He'll spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, remembering the 2 people he underestimated, the old woman and the cripple. And me, I got my house back. I got all of it back. The company, the assets, the stocks. The court restored everything Keisha and Chad had stolen. But I don't live in that house anymore. I sold it. The memories of what Marcus and I built were beautiful, but the memory of my daughter crawling on that floor begging had tainted it. My future wasn't in that house. My future is here. My new office is different. It's not the small, cramped room I shared with Marcus for 40 years. It's on the top floor of a glass building. I can see the Atlantic Ocean from my desk. The sign on the door doesn't say Thorne Enterprises. It says the Washington Thorne Family Foundation. Xavier and I, we co-founded it. We took the millions that Mark Jenkins stole, and the millions Keisha and Chad tried to steal, and we turned it into a weapon for good. We provide safe, affordable housing for seniors. We offer free legal aid, especially to elderly people of color who are being targeted by their own families. We fight for the people who are told they are too old or too weak to fight for themselves. My desk is clear. My mind is sharp. I am 67 years old, and I have never worked harder in my life. The door to my office opens. Xavier comes in. He doesn't use the old chair anymore. This one is sleek, modern. Most days, he doesn't even use the chair at all. He prefers his crutches. He says it's a better workout. He's smiling, his real smile. It reaches his eyes. Imani, he says, his real voice now strong and confident. He places a tablet on my desk. We just saved a house in Atlanta, he says. A son was trying to get a forged power of attorney. Our lawyers intercepted the filing and stopped the sale. The mother is safe. I nod. I pick up the tablet. I look at the case file. A 70-year-old woman, a greedy son, a familiar story. Good, I say, my voice firm. Send me the next list. We have work to do. My daughter. Keisha. She told me I had a choice. Either you work or you're out on the street. She was right. I did have a choice. I chose to work. And now, my work is to make sure that no one, no greedy child, no predatory partner, can ever throw anyone else out on the street again. So, what do you think? Did I do the right thing? Imani's story teaches us a powerful lesson. Never let anyone underestimate your worth, especially when they think your best years are behind you. Keisha and Chad looked at Imani and saw an old, grieving widow. They didn't see the brilliant CFO who had run a company for 40 years. They saw weakness, so they showed their greed. In the same way, Mark Jenkins looked at Xavier and saw a disabled man, not the genius who was about to take him down. Their enemies made the same fatal mistake. They confused grief with helplessness and age with irrelevance. This story shows us that even when you are pushed to the absolute brink, your experience, your dignity, and your intelligence are weapons they can never steal. Imani didn't just survive. She turned her pain into a purpose, reminding us that true strength isn't about what you have, but about who you are. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family?